The morning fog rolled low over the forest floor, soft and heavy like spilled milk, swallowing the narrow trail behind Mrs. Halpern's cabin. It was early, too early for anyone else to be walking out there, but Duke, her old Labrador, had been restless since dawn. He had scratched at the back door until she finally sighed, pulled on her boots, and stepped into the chill air. "All right, Duke, what's gotten into you?" she muttered, wrapping her coat tighter around her. Duke didn't answer, he just surged ahead, muscles quivering under his golden fur, tail stiff like a flag. The leash tugged tight between them as he pulled her toward the woods. His nose worked the ground furiously, low growls rumbling from deep in his chest. He had always been gentle, lazy even. A dog who preferred napping by the fire to chasing rabbits. But this morning, something was different. There was tension in him, an alertness that made Mrs. Halpern uneasy. They moved deeper into the trees, the world growing quieter with every step. The usual birdsong was absent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Duke stopped suddenly, ears erect, eyes fixed on something ahead. "Duke," she whispered. He barked once, sharp, loud, and angry. The sound tore through the silence and echoed through the woods. Then he growled, low and dangerous. Mrs. Halpern followed his gaze and saw it, an ancient oak towering above the others, its trunk massive and scarred by age. Moss covered much of its base, and the bark was rough and dark like old stone. But what caught her eye wasn't the tree itself, it was a strange bulge near its center. The lump protruded outward, the size of a person's torso, the bark stretched and cracked around it. The color was different too, darker and almost glossy in spots, as if something beneath was pushing outward, trapped. Duke barked again, lunging forward. His claws tore into the earth as he strained against the leash, nose pointed directly at the lump. "Stop it, Duke," she said, tugging him back. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "It's just a tree, you silly boy." But Duke didn't stop. He growled harder, his fur bristling. Then suddenly, his tone changed. The bark gave way to a low, trembling whine, the kind dogs make when they sense danger, or fear. He backed up slowly, eyes never leaving the tree, his tail dropping between his legs. That's when Mrs. Halpern's heart began to beat faster. Duke had chased off coyotes before, even stood his ground against a black bear once. But she had never seen him afraid like this. She took a hesitant step toward the oak. The air smelled different there, damp and sweet, but with a sour undertone, like something had rotted deep within. She reached out, gloved fingers brushing the bark. It felt odd, softer than it should. The texture wasn't uniform. Some parts were rough, but others were smooth, almost rubbery. Her hand trembled as she leaned closer. The surface seemed to ripple slightly in the dim light. Beneath the bark, faint lines and angles pressed outward, like the shape of something trapped just under the surface. Something human. She gasped and jerked back, heart hammering in her chest. For a long moment, she could only stare. Maybe it was her imagination. Trees grew in strange ways all the time. She told herself that, over and over. But her gut said otherwise. Her phone felt heavy in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands and dialed 911. Her voice was thin and shaky as she spoke. "Yes, hello. I'm at Pine Hollow Road, just behind my cabin. My dog found something. I don't know what it is, but it's inside a tree. It doesn't look right." The dispatcher's calm voice asked her to describe it. She tried, stumbling over words like lump, and shape, and not wood. They told her to stay put, that officers would be there soon. She hung up and looked back at the tree. Duke sat beside her now, silent but watchful, his body pressed close to her leg. His breathing was fast. The mist was starting to thin as the sun tried to rise, streaks of light piercing the canopy in pale shafts. But the clearing around the oak remained oddly dim, as if the tree swallowed the light. 15 minutes later, the sound of engines echoed through the woods. 2 police SUVs arrived at the trailhead, followed by a ranger truck. Mrs. Halpern waved them over, relief washing through her. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" asked the first officer, a tall man with a notepad. She pointed toward the oak. "It's that tree. There's something in it. My dog found it." The officers exchanged skeptical looks but followed her to the clearing. Duke didn't move. He just lay down, head on his paws, eyes fixed on the lump. The ranger crouched beside the oak and ran a hand over the bulge. Strange, he murmured. Feels hollow in parts. He knocked gently. A dull sound echoed, like tapping on wood that wasn't solid. Could be a hollow, said one officer. Animals sometimes burrow. Not this shape, interrupted the ranger, narrowing his eyes. This isn't natural growth. He pressed again, this time harder. The surface gave slightly under his palm. Sap oozed out, thick and dark like old blood. The smell was stronger now, earthy, but tainted with something metallic. Everyone stepped back instinctively. I'm calling this in, said the ranger, straightening. We'll need a forensic team. Nobody touch it again. They began setting up a perimeter. Yellow tape went around the oak as more officers arrived. Cameras flashed. The distant hum of a generator filled the air. Mrs. Halpern watched from a distance, Duke still beside her. She felt a deep unease settle in her chest. The way the bark bulged outward, it wasn't random. It looked like something had been absorbed. A young officer with a flashlight peered closer, his light cutting through the dark crevices. Sir, he called softly, I think there's something under here. The ranger returned, crouching beside him. He ran the light along the bark where it cracked open from their earlier touch. Inside, just beneath the layer of wood, there was a faint color that didn't belong. Pale, almost white. The ranger frowned. He reached for his multi-tool and carefully wedged it under a strip of bark. With a slow, deliberate motion, he peeled it away. The bark came off with a wet, tearing sound. What lay beneath made him freeze. A smooth surface, curved, faintly colored with the tone of old bone. The officer beside him swore under his breath. No, that can't be what I think it is. The ranger stood abruptly, stepping back. His voice came out low and tense. Everyone back up. Now, Mrs. Halpern clutched Duke's collar tightly. Her throat felt dry. What is it? No one answered. The officers were already calling for backup, forensics, the coroner. The old oak stood silent, its ancient branches creaking softly above them, as if mocking the sudden panic below. Duke let out one last bark, short and sharp, and then went quiet again, staring into the heart of the tree as if he saw something no one else could. By the time the sun reached its peak, Pine Hollow had transformed into a place of flashing lights, hushed voices, and the low hum of official machinery. The ancient oak, once just another sentinel among the trees, was now the heart of a crime scene. Police cars lined the dirt trail, their tires sunk halfway into the soft earth. Yellow tape fluttered in the cold breeze, circling the clearing like a warning. Detective Marlowe stood with his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, staring at the tree. The chainsaw's distant buzz had ceased an hour ago, but its echo still seemed to cling to the air. The oak's side was split open now, its interior exposed, a jagged wound in the forest. Inside, the pale form they had uncovered sat half embedded in the wood, fused into it as if the tree had grown around the shape slowly, deliberately, over time. Even after 20 years on the force, Marlowe couldn't remember seeing anything quite like it. The forensic pathologist, Drive. Clara Niles, knelt beside the exposed section. Her voice was steady but quiet, reverent even. The body's been here a long time, she said, brushing away bark dust with a soft brush. You can see where the tree tried to seal over it. It's as though the wood grew around the corpse like scar tissue. Jesus, one of the officers muttered. It's like the forest ate him. Marlowe said nothing. He stepped closer, the smell of rot and damp wood thick in his nostrils. The figure inside was mostly skeletal now, though some leathery remnants of skin clung to bone. The outline was unmistakable, arms drawn close to the torso, head bent slightly forward, like the person had been pressed inward, crushed over decades. Mrs. Halpern sat wrapped in a blanket on a nearby log, Duke lying silent at her feet. The dog hadn't barked once since the discovery. He watched with wary eyes, head resting on his paws. Every so often, his nose twitched toward the air as though smelling something only he could detect. Marlowe walked over to her. You all right, ma'am? She nodded faintly. I can't stop thinking that my dog knew. He knew something was wrong before any of us did. Animals have good instincts, he said. He probably smelled something off. She looked up, her eyes wet. You think that person, that they were alive when the tree started to grow? He hesitated. We don't know yet. But we'll find out. She didn't seem convinced. She kept her eyes fixed on the oak, its hollow gleaming faintly in the afternoon light, and whispered something under her breath, something about the forest remembering. Back by the tree, Clara and her team had uncovered more details. She pointed at the base of the cavity. There's something metallic near the hand. It's embedded deep, but I think it's man-made. They worked carefully, chipping away bits of bark, prying loose roots that had wrapped around the object. After several minutes, it came free with a faint scrape. Clara held it up, brushing away dirt. The sunlight caught on something dull and corroded. It was a badge. Marlowe felt the air in his lungs freeze. Looks like a sheriff's badge, one of the techs said. Clara nodded. Definitely old. Styles mid-20th century, maybe earlier. Marlowe took it carefully. The engraving was faint but still legible, County Sheriff's Department. The number beneath it was almost worn away, but he could make out enough to log it. He turned the badge over in his hand. We'll need to cross-reference this with missing officers, he said quietly. Start from the 50s, maybe earlier. While the forensic team continued their work, a few reporters had started to gather beyond the tape, their camera flashes cutting through the trees. Word had spread fast. A body inside a tree was too strange not to. The sheriff himself arrived not long after, grim-faced and silent, and took Marlowe aside for a quick conversation. By late afternoon, the first results came through. The badge had belonged to Deputy Charles Finch, a lawman who had vanished in 1954 while investigating illegal logging operations on the outskirts of town. He'd been last seen heading into Pine Hollow to question a group of lumbermen suspected of working without permits. No one had ever found a body. Until now. Marlowe stood quietly, the file open in his hand, the photograph of Finch staring back at him in black and white. A young man in uniform, clean-cut, smiling. He looked like every optimistic rookie who thought the badge meant justice was certain. Clara's voice drew his attention. There's something else, Detective. You'll want to see this. He crossed back to the oak, stepping over cables and toolboxes. The pathologist was brushing at something carved into the inner wood, faint but deliberate. When the dirt and moss came free, a pattern of letters began to emerge. Marlowe leaned closer, squinting. At first, it was just scratches. Then words. They buried me alive. And beneath it, carved deeper, a final phrase. The trees remember. The forest went silent. Even the sound of the nearby generator seemed to fade for a moment. Clara took a step back, exhaling shakily. That wasn't made recently. The grooves are filled with decades of growth. He carved that in before the tree fully sealed over him. Marlowe's mind raced. He must have been alive when it happened. Maybe restrained, left inside a hollow, and the tree grew around him. But why would anyone do that? She asked softly. He looked out into the dense woods, their trunks rising like pillars in a cathedral. Maybe to make sure he was never found. The wind stirred the leaves, whispering faintly through the branches. It almost sounded like voices. Reporters tried to push closer, shouting questions. Officers moved to hold them back. The sheriff spoke quietly with his deputy, his expression grim. We'll have to search the area, Marlowe heard him say. If this was murder, there may be more bodies here. The ranger who'd first touched the oak stood off to the side, staring up at the canopy. You know, he murmured to no one in particular, locals used to say these woods were cursed. That the trees grew faster where people went missing. No one laughed. Dusk began to settle over Pine Hollow. The forest took on a bluish hue, shadows stretching long and thin. The forensic team packed up what they could, covering the exposed remains with a tarp. Mrs. Halpern was escorted home. Duke followed obediently, glancing back at the clearing once before disappearing down the path. Marlowe lingered. He couldn't pull himself away. Something about the oak felt aware. He stood before it, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the words carved into its heart. The letters seemed to shift in the dying light, the grooves darkening like fresh ink. The trees remember. He whispered the phrase under his breath. What do you remember, old man? A soft creak sounded from above, just a branch moving in the wind, he told himself. But the sound that followed made his blood run cold. It was faint, buried under the rustle of leaves. A low moan, like breath escaping through wood. Then silence again. He stood there for a long time, until the others began to call his name. When he finally turned to leave, the forest seemed to exhale, a sigh through countless leaves. He looked back one last time. The words carved into the trunk were barely visible now in the twilight. But for a moment, just a moment, he could have sworn the bark rippled. As though something deep inside the tree had stirred. Something that wasn't finished remembering.